I ask him what engagements he has planned for the rest of the day.
Minister. First Minister.
I've written, Presiding Officer, to the Government and the President of the United States expressing the sympathy and solidarity of Scotland in relation to the extraordinary weather conditions which have engulfed the eastern seaboard. And later today I'll have meetings to take forward the Government's programmes for Scotland.
Joanne Lamont.
And I'm sure in that letter our sensibilities and sympathies go to the people of America in these difficult times. Last week, the Deputy First Minister's spokesman said there was a cast-iron position that an independent Scotland would retain the pound. I congratulate the First Minister on gaining such unequivocal agreement. Can I ask when this agreement with the Treasury and the Bank of England was reached, when and where was it signed, and when did negotiations start?
First Minister.
Well, I'm sure that even Joanne Lamont's heard that the Secretary of State for Scotland pointed out that there was no legal bar on Scotland having sterling as its currency. And the proposition that we put forward for a sterling zone is an extremely reasonable one. I'm not certain of what the Labour Party's position in terms of the currency for independent Scotland should be, but we think it suits the interests of Scotland and suits the interests of the rest of the UK to have a sterling zone. In terms of Scotland's interest, there is the argument for continuity of the sterling position. In terms of both our interests, it's what would be called an optimal currency area in terms of the productivity of both currencies.
Order.
It's not my description. It's the description of the Institute of Fiscal Studies. And lastly, the question as to why it would be in the interest of the rest of the UK, well, of course, revenues from Scotland's resources would come to Scotland, but in terms of the protection to the balance of payments, it would afford some £40 billion sterling protection to the balance of payments of the sterling zone. I think they'd be biting our hands off for Scotland to retain that sterling membership.
Joanne Lamont.
Well, in the First Minister's own words, that was a very, very convincing response in terms of the debate. Because there's not a legal bar to a lot of things, but that's a different point altogether from a cast-iron guarantee. Hope, expectation, it would all be great if they could just agree with it, is not the same as a cast-iron guarantee. Surely even the First Minister understands that. So let me recap. According to the First Minister, we'll be in the EU without having to reply, and we know that without asking any other member state or anyone for legal advice. We know we won't have to have the euro, and we don't need to ask about that either. And we'll keep the pound, and we don't need to ask anyone about that too. Can I ask the First Minister, without looking at the long-range forecast, what will the weather be like in an independent Scotland?
First Minister.
I wonder,
Order. First Minister.
in the interests of a serious debate on the issue, has Joanne Lamont managed to cast her eye over the evidence of Grain Avery to the House of Commons Foreign Affairs Committee? She'll recall that Grain Avery is a senior member of St Andrews College, Oxford, senior advisor to the European Policy Centre and Honorary Director General of the European Commission. He points out that Scotland's 5 million people, having been members of the European Union for 40 years, have acquired rights as European citizens. For practical and political reasons, they could not be asked to leave the EU and apply for readmission. Now, I know this is very inconvenient for the political weather facing the Labour Party, but it does rather put the lie to the scaremongering campaign of Labour and their unionist colleagues in the Conservative Party.
Joanne Lamont.
No, in the interest of a serious debate, the First Minister ought to stop finding somebody that he alleges agree with them and quoting them in this place. There are a lot of different positions in this, including that, of course, of his own backbencher, John Mason, who said on Tuesday that these things are not definite, they are all open to negotiation. The First Minister, the charge is at his door, is that he asserts things for which he has no evidence. And it is about time It is about time that the First Minister got serious about the future of Scotland. It's the First Minister who thinks he can treat the people of Scotland like fools, who thinks we'll believe everything he says, when after last week no one trusts a word he says. I understand why he didn't turn up to Tuesday's debate to defend his reputation, because even he knows he no longer has a reputation to defend. What is it that he is so scared of that he can't ask the Bank of England about the pound, he can't ask other EU members about Europe, or is it just he simply can't face the truth when he is presented with it?
Well,
First Minister.
On the question of sterling, can Joanne Lamont remember that we set up a fiscal commission with two Nobel laureates in economics who are pursuing that matter, which seems to me a pretty serious contribution into the debate. In terms of Graham Avery, I've read out his credentials. I suspect he knows, given he's an honorary Director General of the European Union, he knows rather more about these issues even than Joanne Lamont. In terms of the trust and the serious debate which Joanne Lamont thinks she wants to argue for, can I just point out that these matters have been tested. I'm not just talking about in the Scottish elections last year, but in the social attitude survey, which tests the trust in the Scottish Government against the trust in the UK Government. That's running at 64% to 24%. And then, of course, the question asked by YouGov just last week about who's best standing up for Scotland. Who do people trust to stand up for Scotland? Joanne Lamont's figure was 6%. So, on behalf of the other 94% of the people of Scotland, can I say the reason that people don't trust the Labour Party in Scotland is he stood on a manifesto commitment to defend the freeze on the council tax, to defend free tuition, to defend free prescriptions and a free health service, and Joanne Lamont's in the middle of tearing up every single one of these commitments. The first political party in history to betray its commitments when it's in opposition, an extraordinary achievement from the Labour Party. So if the Labour Party wants to regain the trust of the people, then why not have that debate on the issues facing this country? And why not acknowledge that oil-rich, gas-rich, energy-rich Scotland, fishing-rich Scotland will be welcomed with open arms in the European Union?
Joanne Lamont. Order.
In the debate about Scotland's future, I stand with Campbell Christie in saying in tough times you look at competing good demands and make sure that those of us with the broadest shoulders are the ones that take the heaviest burden. And he says he's setting up his fiscal group. But surely it would have been an idea to pursue the matter of whether we're going to have the pound or not with the Bank of England and the Treasury. They will be the people that will decide that matter. But of course, the First Minister has long sought international profile, and my goodness, he's got it. The Washington Post, the newspaper that exposed...
Order.
You may have read it. The Washington Post, the newspaper that exposed Richard Nixon's corruption, knows a chancer when it sees one. And it makes a serious charge.
Order. Order.
The Washington Post said, Mr Salmond's... I'm sure you've read it, but would like to share it with others. Mr Salmond's cheerful assurances that Scotland could quickly join the European Union while retaining the British pound as its currency remain to be tested. London would have a veto over both. EU states might demand that Scotland commit to the wobbly euro. If the pound was split between two nations, it could become subject to the same troubles that have afflicted the European currency. These are serious matters being addressed by serious people. If the Post can see that from Washington, why can't the First Minister see that from here?
First Minister.
Well, as those who have read the Washington Post editorial, they'll realise it made almost as many mistakes as Joanne Lamont made, some points of fact in the week. But I actually welcome the the contribution of newspapers in the United States of America to the Scottish political debate, and the Washington Post is not alone. The Los Angeles Times on October the 22nd. Arguably, the most important difference would be that an independent Scotland would be master of its own economy and natural resources. I very much agree with that. Then there's the Wall Street Journal, and I think this quote will be particularly apposite for Joanne Lamont. All too often, this debate rarely gets past the sneering view that Scotland would be too poor or too small to stand on its own 2 feet outside the UK. But the claim that Scotland is a subsidy junkie has already been proved a myth. New accounts of revenue and expenditure from the Treasury data show Scotland rarely gives more than it receives from the UK coffers. You know, if that is known and understood to the Wall Street Journal, why hasn't the news reached the Labour Party in Scotland? But can I say to Joanne Lamont, I'm absolutely fascinated by the approach to the serious political debate. And you know, a year is a kind of a time in Joanne Lamont's leadership, because I came across an article, actually an interview she did with The Guardian just a year ago, when she talked about her great frustration. Her great frustration. I'm more frustrated by the politics where you play the man and not the politics. I think after a few weeks, when Joanne Lamont has managed to call me stupid, wee eck, a sucker, devious and a corkscrew, I think after that, comparing with the interview, no wonder nobody believes a word she says.
Question number 2.